The night the storm rolled through, the radio was the only steady thing in the ambulance bay, and by then his voice had already rearranged something in my chest without my permission. Rescue 9, be advised, the bridge on County Road 6 is flooding. Take the long way around through Miller's Pass. A pause, the length he always left, like he was checking his own sentence for splinters before he handed it to me. It'll cost you 6 minutes. Better than the current costing you the rig. I said, copy that, the way I always did. Flat, professional, nothing in my voice to give away that I'd stopped what I was doing to listen. My partner, Denise, caught me anyway. She always did. You've got to look, she said, buckling in. Like church! It's rain, I told her. Rain makes everybody look holy. She let it go because we had a call, an elderly man down in his kitchen out past the reservoir, and the roads were bad enough that neither of us had breath to spare on teasing. But she wasn't wrong, and I knew it the whole drive, tires hissing on wet asphalt, his directions crackling through every few minutes to keep us out of the water, calm as a man reading a bedtime story to a kid who couldn't sleep. My name is Priya Anand. I've been a paramedic for 4 years, the last 2 of them at Cedar Hollow County EMS, a service so small we all know each other's coffee orders and each other's exes and, in my case, each other's radio voice better than their faces. The dispatcher I'm talking about goes by Ford on the air, just Ford. I didn't learn his first name was Elias until month 7, and I only learned it because Denise looked it up on the roster taped inside the break room cabinet, smug as a cat, and wouldn't tell me until I admitted out loud that I wanted to know. It started small, the way these things do. A dispatcher gives you facts. Address, hazard, patient complaint, unit assignment. That's the whole job on paper. But somewhere in my first winter at Cedar Hollow, I noticed Ford gave you something extra, tucked in at the edges where nobody was required to put anything at all. He'd tell you which pothole to avoid, not because policy made him, but because he seemed to actually picture you hitting it. He'd tell you to grab a coat before a call outside, because he could see on some screen that it had dropped 10 degrees in an hour. Once, at 2 in the morning, in the middle of relaying an address for a chest pain call, he said, "Anand, you sound tired tonight. Hand off the driving to Cole if you need to," and I sat there in the driver's seat feeling seen in a way that made my throat go tight before I'd even processed why. I told myself it was nothing. Dispatchers are supposed to be good at their jobs, and part of being good at that job is tracking who's on shift, who's flagging, who needs a nudge. It's not personal. It's professional competence with a nice voice attached. I told myself that for months, actually believed it some days, the way you believe a lot of things you've decided you need to believe. Then came the Whitfield call, and I stopped being able to lie to myself about it. It was a bad one. A house fire out on Route 9, a family of 4, smoke inhalation, one of the kids not breathing right when we got there. Chaos on scene, fire department shouting over each other, my hands doing the job on muscle memory because my brain was 3 seconds behind everything happening in front of me. And through all of it, Ford's voice on the radio, steady as a metronome, feeding me information I needed exactly when I needed it, and not 1 second before, keeping the second ambulance routed around the fire trucks, keeping the county chopper's landing zone clear, never once raising his voice, even when everybody else on that channel was shouting. We got the kids stable. We got the family to Cedar Hollow General. And when I finally sat down in the bay afterward, hands still shaking a little, the radio clicked once, quiet, off the official channel where nobody else would hear it. "Anand, nice work out there tonight." That was it. 5 words. I sat in that ambulance and cried for maybe 90 seconds. Not because of the fire, not really, but because somebody had noticed I needed to hear that exact thing at that exact moment, and he'd said it like he'd been waiting for a chance to. I think a lot of people who've worked nights know what I'm describing, even if they've never worn a radio on their hip. That feeling of being kept company by someone who isn't in the room. A coworker on a headset during a long shift, a friend who texts back at 3 in the morning without complaint, a person whose presence you've never had to look at but somehow trust more than people you see every day. I wonder sometimes if that's a lesser kind of closeness or a purer one, stripped down to just the parts that matter, no face to get distracted by, no body language to misread. I still don't have an answer. I've turned it over enough nights now that I've stopped expecting one. Denise thought the whole thing was ridiculous and told me so constantly. "You've built an entire man out of traffic control and compliments. she said one evening, eating gas station pretzels in the bay while we waited for a call. "You don't know if he's got a dog. You don't know if he snores. You don't know if he's even single, Priya." "I know his voice does something to my stomach that yours doesn't," I said, and she threw a pretzel at me, and we both laughed. And underneath the laughing, I felt the truth of it settle in a little deeper, uncomfortable as a stone in a shoe. Here's the thing about small county services, though. Dispatch and field crews don't mix much. Ford worked out of the county centre 40 minutes from our station. Different building, different shift rotation half the time, and paramedics who tried to swing by dispatch uninvited got side-eyed by supervisors who didn't love blurred lines. I'd asked Denise once, half joking, if I should just drive over there sometime, and she'd looked at me like I'd suggested arson. "You don't crash a man's workplace because you like his voice," she said. "That's not romantic, that's a restraining order waiting to happen." She had a point, infuriatingly. So I waited. Not patiently, exactly, but I waited. The way you wait for a kettle you know is going to whistle eventually if you just don't touch it. 9 months into this slow, ridiculous, one-sided thing, Cedar Hollow held its annual EMS appreciation dinner. Dispatch and field staff both invited. A rare night, everybody actually showed up in the same room. I spent 40 minutes in front of my closet deciding what to wear to a county government banquet in a rented function hall, which tells you everything about where my head was. I saw him before I heard him, which felt backward, like watching a movie with the sound cut. Tall, dark hair going a little grey at the temples early, a laugh that carried across the room when one of the older dispatchers told a joke about a supervisor who wasn't there. I knew it was him before anyone said his name, the same way I always knew his voice through static. Some particular quality of stillness in how he stood, listening more than talking, the same unhurried attention he gave a radio call. Denise elbowed me so hard I nearly dropped my drink. "That's Ford." "I know," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I meant it to. He found me before I found the courage to find him, which I've decided since then says more about him than it does about me. He crossed the room with 2 glasses of the terrible banquet wine and just said, plain as anything, "You're Anand." I'd know that voice anywhere, even off the radio. And there it was, the thing I hadn't let myself hope for, that he'd been listening to. That whatever had been happening on my end of that radio hadn't been happening alone. We talked for 2 hours that night, past the point where Denise gave up trying to catch my eye and left with somebody from the fire department instead. He told me his name was Elias, that he'd been a dispatcher for 11 years, that he'd started after a stretch as an EMT himself before a bad knee took him off the truck and put him behind a headset instead, which explained the particular attentiveness, the way he seemed to actually picture you on scene rather than just processing an address. He told me he'd started noticing my voice on the radio around the same time I'd started noticing his, that he'd looked forward to my shifts the way you look forward to a song coming on the radio, and that he'd talked himself out of saying anything for the better part of a year because dispatch and field crews weren't supposed to get tangled up, because he didn't want to be the reason I got a talking to, from a supervisor, because, and here he laughed at himself, a little embarrassed, he genuinely hadn't known if a voice could be enough to build real feelings on, and he hadn't wanted to find out he was wrong by asking. "So what changed?" I asked. "You looked like you wanted me to come over," he said. "I decided I'd rather be wrong in person than right from across a room." I think about that sentence more than I probably should. I think about how much of what we call falling for someone actually happens in the ordinary moments nobody's performing for, the unglamorous ones. A warning about a flooded road, a reminder to eat something, 5 quiet words after a bad call. Not the big gestures, the small, repeated proof that somebody's paying attention to you when they don't have to be. We've been together 2 years now. He still works dispatch. I still work the truck. And some nights, when the county's quiet and the calls are slow, he'll click onto the private channel just to say something dumb. Tell me my coffee's getting cold in the pot he knows I forgot about. Ask if I ate dinner, and I'll sit there in the driver's seat grinning like an idiot at a radio, same as I did the very first time, except now I get to drive home to the voice instead of just listening to it drive away. Denise still claims she called it before I did. She didn't. But I let her have it, because some things aren't worth arguing when you're this happy to have been wrong about waiting so long to say something out loud.